UFP, the United Federation of Podcasts.
Welcome to Franchise Fatigue, the United Federation of Podcasts, little podcast that goes through all the movies and all the sequels in a franchise. I guess I should say franchise, because franchise is the name of the show, and the thing that we talk about is the franchises, because my good friend Zach Moore and I love movies, we love sequels, and we love seeing all the movies in a franchise. And our very first franchise that we are talking about is Mission Impossible. Tonight we're talking about Mission Impossible 3. And I couldn't do it without Zach. Zach, how are you doing?
Where's the rabbit's foot?
Rabbit's foot, I think, is honestly, in my opinion, if we're going to get right into that,
Where's the rabbit's foot?
I think it's like a biological weapon. That's what I think.
You don't think I'll do it?
I think it's a biological weapon. What do you think it is?
No, I was asking you, where's the rabbit's foot?
I thought you said, what's the rabbit's foot?
No, I was doing a bit, like from the beginning of the movie. You know, you're thrown in the situation, you know what's going on, but there you are, just answering along, ignoring what I'm saying.
Messing up your joke.
The rabbit's foot is a MacGuffin, right? And that's what it is. Like, it is the true MacGuffin in the Hitchcockian sense. It doesn't matter what it is, only that what it represents and what people want. So
I understand that, but what I think it is a biological weapon.
Well, I have that hazard label on it.
Yeah.
Know, so.
Yes, that's right. It is very, very Hitchcockian. It is very much a MacGuffin, and a MacGuffin is a device that is advancing the plot and making the characters do what they are doing, and it's very important to the characters, but it really means nothing to the audience. Whatever it is completely irrelevant to them doing their plot. And yes, this is absolutely a MacGuffin, and we did just talk about this on my last episode of Good Evening and Alfred Hitchcock podcast, and we actually referenced Mission Impossible 3 as one of the great MacGuffins and the rabbit's foot. So, check it out. It's awesome. But tonight, we're not here to talk about Hitchcock. We may talk about MacGuffins again later. Maybe we will talk about Hitchcock. I don't know. Who knows where these conversations go. Before we jump into it, though, Zach, you gonna hit me up with some trivia?
I am. So, Mission Impossible 3. Funny, this kind of ties back into some Mission Impossible 1 trivia. Remember how I said Mission Impossible 1 was the last major motion picture to be released on Betamax?
Yes.
Mission Impossible 3 was Paramount's first digital film. They were the last studio that kept releasing actual film to theaters, and it took them the longest to turn over to digital printing of films to send out to theaters. So Mission Impossible 3 was the first film they ever released digitally. So file that away, you cinema nerds. So Mission Impossible 3 went through a list of directors and writers. Initially, Ang Lee was in talks to direct. Ben Treeblecook, who I've never heard of before, but he's an English screenwriter. He was going to write a story that involved all the wonders of the world. It was going to be a prequel to the first movie and bring back Emilio Estevez, which I think is a really bizarre idea. Especially, we're looking at like we're looking at the early 2000s here. Emilio Estevez hadn't been relevant in about 10 years, so I don't know why that would have been such a big pull to get. But it contained elements that seemed too sensitive in a post-9/11 world. I don't know exactly what that means, but that was a factor of why they kind of moved on from that. David Fincher was the next director they talked about. He wrote a script with, the script that he was working on was with Frank Darabont. It's about trafficking human organs and things of that nature, body parts, black market trade in Africa. But he eventually dropped out to produce Lords of Dogtown, which he also then dropped out of directing that movie too. So, so David Fincher, right? But when he was in the director's chair, Sylvester Stallone was a name they were talking about being a main villain in the film, which would have been interesting to see Stallone as a main villain in a movie. I don't think he ever really has.
I don't think he's ever played a villain, has he?
No, I mean he's either been a hero or an anti-hero, but I've never seen him as a villain. So
wow.
Then finally, Joe Carnahan was attached to the film. He worked on it for 15 months, but eventually quit over creative differences. He he actually filmed the meeting where he quit because he figured it was going to be the end of his Hollywood career, quitting this movie. But he came back for a film that came out in 2006 as well, Smokin' Aces, which became a cult hit. Mm-hmm. Tom Cruise actually selected Joe Carnahan because he was impressed by his work on Narc, because Cruise was an executive producer on Narc. The film was going to be produced in 2004 for the 2005 release, Mission Impossible 3, but Universal fast-tracked War of the Worlds with Steven Spielberg, so that kind of delayed Tom Cruise's availability. So that's why, again, you look at the gaps between the release dates, right? You have 1996, 2000, and then 2006. You're like, come on. Taking you, what is it, the Kelvin Star Trek movie? Take you 10 years to make 3 movies. Speaking of the Kelvin Star Trek movies, right? Segue, J.J. Abrams became the director of the film. Tom Cruise had been impressed by his work on Alias. Apparently, Tom Cruise had watched Alias on DVD. It's funny how he comes across these directors he wants to work with. But they called J.J. Abrams in, and this is J.J. Abrams' feature film debut. He'd done a lot of television work, but this is his first major motion picture. And at the time, I don't know if this still stands, but at the time, this was the highest budgeted movie for a first-time director. So,
okay.
For what that's worth. And J.J. Abrams, he does cameo in the film when Ethan's at the hospital looking for Julia. I couldn't spot him myself, so maybe when I watch it next time, I'll look for him. But I had an eye out for him. I just couldn't find him. So pulling a Hitchcock there, Brandon. Cameoing in his own film. So talking about some of their trending characters, Thandie Newton was offered the chance to return, but she turned it down to spend more time with her family. So they changed her character into a character called Leah Quint, who was to be played by Carrie Ann Moss. But when J.J. Abrams took over the movie, that character was just totally scrapped, and that whole plot line was scrapped. And they created a new love interest, Julia, who, his fiance, and then his wife. Rachel McAdams turned down that role, which was taken by Michelle Monaghan. And Ricky Gervais was actually supposed to play the Simon Pegg role, the Benji role in the film. But there was production and casting changes, so Gervais dropped out, and Simon Pegg joined on. And interesting that Simon Pegg was actually, he was just becoming mainstream around this time, the mid-2000s. And he joked in an interview after Shaun of the Dead. He was asked if he was going to be pursuing a career in Hollywood, because he'd usually been in British TV shows, movies, and things like that. And he literally said, it's not like I'm going to be in Mission Impossible 3. So that's pretty funny, I thought. And a couple more casting. There's so much casting changes and would-bes in this movie. Scarlett Johansson was cast early on, but had to drop out. And she was going to play the Kerry Russell role. So Kerry Russell took that spot. Kerry Russell having worked with J.J. Abrams in the past on Alias, so they had a relationship there. And then finally for the cast, Kenneth Branagh was cast as the villain, but when the movie was delayed to 2006, he had to drop out to begin work on the movie As You Like It, which also came out in 2006. And then actually one last thing, J.J. Abrams had approached Martin Landau again, a star of the original series of Mission Impossible, to make a cameo. Well, Landau declined, saying he was finished with the franchise. So he kept trying to get these guys back, but they were just not interested. So
wow, that's interesting.
And then a couple last things about the production of the movie, like during the film. At the end when they're shooting the capsule up, Ethan's nose. Yeah, that's actually, they tried it a few times with the henchman there, but he kept jamming it up Tom Cruise's nose too rough. So eventually they just decided to kind of put some makeup on Tom Cruise's hands so it looked like the other guy, and that's Tom Cruise's own hand shoving it up his nose, so he would know like how far to, like, he wanted to look as real as possible, didn't want to hurt himself. And then I'm not sure what the reasoning was behind this, but spoilers here, right? But the scene where Billy Crudup comes in, Musgrave, to talk to Ethan after they've quote unquote shot Julia, but it's not really her. That scene was rewritten the morning it was shot, so Crudup is reading that entire scene, all of his lines, off cue cards.
Yeah, they talked about that stuff in the commentary, the reading off the lines and it being his hand up his nose and whatnot. So that was kind of interesting. Yeah, excellent. Right on. I bet you, like, one of the things that you said there, talking about one of the original drafts with being sensitive for 9/11, I bet you they were probably because you had said there was the Wonders of the World. Like, it was probably terrorists bombing these kinds of places, right? It would be a terrorist bombing.
Hold them ransom or something. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And so they decided not to do that. But you'd almost think that would be far enough afterwards, because, I mean, this was released 4.5, 5 years later, right?
Yeah, but when you're conceiving it, think about it. Like, you're conceiving it just 3 years after, in like 2004. So I can see why that's still a pretty open wound at that point.
So the first place I want to start with this movie, which is I think a really interesting choice, is the aspect of having a home life for Ethan Hunt, where he's the spy, but he can't tell his wife, he's getting married, he's fallen in love, he's living this normal life, but he's got to keep this cover of this job that he has working for this traffic, like the Department of Traffic or whatever it is, and it's really kind of fascinating that they've decided to go this route with this character. What do you think about that, Zach?
Well, they made it where he's not entirely retired, which I liked. Again, it's like, pull me in just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in. It wasn't that, per se. He was more into a training role. Like, he was an instructor. He was preparing new agents, so he was still active. So it wasn't like your cliche, guy retires, settles down with the family, but he gets pulled back into business. He's in the business, and he's having to keep it a secret from his fiancée. Not because he wants to lie to her, because it's just a very dangerous lifestyle, and as we see in this movie, exactly why he had to keep everything a secret from Julia, right?
Yeah, because she became a liability for him. So, like that scene when he is, I'm bad with the names, but what's his name? Philip Seymour Hoffman?
Philip Seymour Hoffman, yes.
Yeah, okay, so Philip Seymour Hoffman, when he's like hanging him outside of the plane and stuff like that, like, did that feel out of character to you? Like, that didn't feel like Ethan Hunt to me.
Well, he was kind of goading him on about how he killed Kerry Russell's character and how it was just fun, and I think Ethan had kind of had enough at that point. Even Luther says, "Hey, man, calm down, it's not you." Now, Luther saying Ethan was a great moment there because, Philip Seymour Hoffman wants to know, he wants to figure out who these guys are, right? And if Ethan hadn't freaked out, Luther hadn't been like, Ethan, Ethan, Ethan. And then, at the end, he's like, see you around, Ethan. So
yes.
It's so sinister, right? And, I buy it because obviously he had... They do a good job selling on how much Kerry Russell's character's death affected Ethan Hunt, because he had trained her, and I think she was the first one that he had, his first student that he had approved for field status. So for her to die and for that guy to be responsible for her death, I see him freaking out like that. But let's talk about Philip Seymour Hoffman. I think he's a great villain because he's so nonchalant and cold and unemotional about all this. And I like that, and these big action movies, like revenge is such a big deal with villains' motivations and all this stuff. Like, this guy, he's just a cold, calculating bad dude, and his monologues is like, you got a wife? You got a girlfriend? I'm going to find her. I'm going to kill her. And I'm going to hurt you in front of her, and that kind of stuff. Like that, that's unsettling stuff. And it shows you don't have to be some yelling psychopath to be a great villain.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Philip Seymour Hoffman is such an outstanding actor. Just the way that he can control his body, the way he can control his voice. There's that scene when he's first Tom Cruise is first putting on the mask.
Right.
And it's that spiral around with Philip Seymour Hoffman, and the way that he grabs
Luther. Yeah.
Luther. Right, and he shakes his arms and stuff. They even address that in the commentary and stuff. And it's such a Tom Cruise move, And then when he's climbing up that bell tower or whatever it is, the way he's hopping around and pulling himself up, that's him. That's Philip Seymour Hoffman.
Right.
And the small touches that he adds, one of the little touches that he did that I think is just outstanding is right after the Asian girl spills the wine on him, right. The way he says that line, "No, I always spill on my custom-made shirts." But then as he turns away, he just touches her face. I don't know if you caught that, but I see it because it's such a fascinating character choice, right? To do this little move to touch her on the face as he's walking away from her. I don't know if you noticed it or not.
No, I didn't notice that. But you're right. He does inject a lot of character into a very little amount of screen time. Yeah, he's barely in this movie. And I was thinking about it, and. If you take out the in media res beginning of the film, I want to talk about that in a second, right? But if you remove that, he doesn't show up till 45 minutes into the movie. His character,
yeah.
And he only has 3 or 4 scenes max, but they're very memorable. And you're right, he brings a lot to it. And I would say up to this point, he's the best villain in the franchise, wouldn't you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I know him. The movie that I know him best from is Boogie Nights. Have you seen Boogie Nights?
Yeah.
Yeah, he plays like a boom mic operator or whatever in the film and whatnot. But